Hello, and welcome to Worker Justice Wisconsin's workshop on labor unionism in the United States, how to organize my coworkers. The goal of this workshop is to give you a basic understanding of the process for organizing a union in your workplace. We'll also cover some of the challenges and your basic right to do this in the United States. So let's get started. So, first off, what is a union? A union is an association of employees that works together to accomplish certain things. Most importantly, fighting for improvements in the workplace, stopping mistreatment from the employer, and more generally, working to build a more just society for working people. And it's really important to stress that unions are independent organizations. They are just for the employees. They are not for management or for people in a management role. And they're also they don't belong in any way, shape, or form to the state, right? So unions are organized by and for the workers. And unions also play a really important role because employers, they know what their interests are, and employers are often part of associations that advocate for employers' interests, right? You know, in the workplace and politics and so on. And so unions are sort of the natural organization that exists for workers to also organize and advocate for their own interests, right? So just like the employers who are organized, workers need to be organized as well, or they're going to lose on every major issue that matters to them because the employers know how to defend their interests. So, in short, that's what a union is. Now, I want to give you just some examples of the many unions that exist in the United States. Unions have a long history in this country. So, there's the United Food and Commercial Workers that represents folks in, food processing plants or grocery stores. There's the United Auto Workers who represent auto workers, but also represent people who build machinery for agriculture, or they even represent employees on college campuses. There's Starbucks Workers United, which is pretty self-explanatory. There's Unite Here, which mostly represents hotel workers across the United States. There's the American Federation of Teachers and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. There is OPEIU, or the Office and Professional Employees Union, which represents folks that work, at universities, at nonprofits, financial institutions, and so on. There's also a union for painters. So these are just some of the examples of unions that exist in the U.S. But pretty much any line of work can be organized. So that's the great thing. Like, unions are for everyone that work. Now, you know, we need to talk about like the concrete benefits of unionizing your workplace. And I think the best way to do that is comparing a company with no union to a company with a union. So in a company without a union, usually there's an employee handbook written by the employer that specifies, the rules for that particular work site. And when there's no union, that handbook is written exclusively by management. At no point will workers be invited in any substantive way to help shape that document. So management holds all the power when it comes to deciding things like wages, benefits, vacation, um, a disciplinary process. Management holds all of the power. In a company without a union, there's also this policy known as at-will employment, where an employer can fire you for practically any reason, right? And it's kind of hard to exaggerate how much power management has to fire us. Um, The example I give is, if your manager is a Bears fan and you're a Packers fan and you show up with a Packers jersey, they can fire you. As crazy as that is, they can fire you, which, puts in jeopardy your ability to pay rent, your ability to buy groceries. It puts you at a tremendous financial risk, right? And so if they can fire you over a Packers jersey, they can fire you, if you talk back or if they come to work grouchy. We've had here workers at the worker center who told us that management accused them, if they worked in a kitchen, management accused them of stealing a knife from the kitchen. They could show that the knife was still there, but there was no legal recourse. They fired them anyway. At will employment. There's also no guarantee of pay raises. The company might choose to give annual pay raises, but at any moment they could choose to reverse that policy. There is nothing obligating them to give out pay raises. So you could work in the same place 5, 10, 15, 20 years making the same hourly rate. There's no protections around seniority, right? Again, you could be working there 5, 10, 15 years. And let's say there's an economic recession and the company has to let people go, right? There's no policy saying who they have to let go first. So it's totally up to management's whims. You also have no representation. If you get called into a disciplinary meeting, you don't ha- you have no right to have someone present there, making sure that management is following all the rules. You have to face that process and potential discipline all on your own. And so the point that I really want to make is that the boss can be sort of a small dictator when there is no union. They make the rules, they can change the rules, they apply the rules however they want. There are very few protections in the United States for workers without unions. Now, in a company with a union, it's like day and night. For starters, you have a legally binding union contract approved by the employees. And what that means is that the employees participate in a very meaningful way in determining the policies at that company. And once you have that union contract, that contract, is illegally binding. If the company violates that contract, they expose themselves to some pretty serious repercussions, including lawsuits, right? And so it gives workers a voice and a vote over their working conditions. You have a role in the decision making process, which is so important because those decisions really affect your quality of life. Every union contract has a just cause firing procedure, right? They can't fire you because of your first mistake, right? The most basic thing would be first there would be a verbal warning, and then there might be a written warning, maybe one or two suspensions, and then a firing. But of course, all of that is spelled out in writing. There's a process they have to follow. Many union contracts have a clause where, if you've gone X amount of time without committing a mistake, 6 months, a year, or whatever, the slate gets wiped clean, right? Like, so management can't just give you written warnings whenever they want or for whatever reason, right? So there is a process for firing someone, which makes sense, right? Like, a firing can completely devastate one's financial situation. That should not be left to, willy-nilly decisions of management. Oftentimes, union contracts bring a schedule for regular raises. So, this year you might get a 3% increase. Next year you might get a 3.5% increase, or it might be pegged to inflation or whatever. But again, it's this idea that workers should have a say in terms of what pay raises look like. There's often protections around seniority. Again, let's take the example. There's an economic recession. You know, someone who's been working there for 10 years and, been a good employee should not be the first one on the chopping block, right? Someone who just started maybe 2 weeks ago, would be let go first, right? And then once the economy picks back up, the company starts hiring more people. Again, it would proceed in terms of seniority. So they would hire back people who had spent more time there. In a company where there is a union, if management is going to investigate you or discipline you, you have a right to have a union representative present. You also have access to lawyers that represent the union. So management cannot just willy nilly pull you aside and unleash whatever they had planned for you, right? It has to be a transparent process where you have someone who's knowledgeable about your contract there present, representing you and advising you. And so, what I really like to say is that the union brings democracy to the workplace, right? Without a union, the boss can do whatever they want like a dictator. In a democracy, we often have a constitution, right? Where the people uh, sort of write the rules that we're all going to play by and that we all have to follow. This is sort of our founding document. A contract, a union contract, is very similar, right? You're not going to get everything, but at least there is a transparent, above board, collective process where we all hash out the rules that are going to govern the workplace that we all have to follow. So the union brings democracy to the workplace. Now, it's really important to remember that you have a legal right to organize a union. It's so important that I'm just going to read this to you. This comes directly from the National Labor Relations Act passed in 1935. This is your right. Employees shall have the right to self organization, to form, join, or assist labor organizations, to bargain collectively through representatives of their own choosing, and to engage in other concerted activities, which basically means collective activities or as a group, for the purpose of collective bargaining or other mutual aid or protection. It is your legal right to talk to your coworkers about wages, benefits, safety, working conditions, whatever. And it's your right to talk about the need for a union. Now, let's talk about this, like, how do you actually do it? Now, the process that I'm going to outline is just the theory. You know, the theory is pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. But as with everything else, applying the theory to reality, to daily life, it's always more complicated. So when you're, moving through this process with your coworkers, you want to keep in mind that, hey, we have to be flexible, we have to adapt. Every work site, every group of workers, every campaign is a little bit different. So just keep that in mind. But this is the theory sort of boiled down to its essentials. Number one, you want to talk to some coworkers that you trust a lot about workplace issues and the need for change. You're not going to go tell everyone. You're not going to start off saying we need a union. You're not going to talk to people with whom you have no relationship or interaction with, right? Like if you're on first shift and you don't really know anyone on third shift, but you bump into someone, you're not going to start talking about these things with that person, right? Like you need to start with a group of people that you trust a lot. Because even though it is your right to talk about a union, that doesn't mean that management won't break the law and try to retaliate. Management does that all the time. So even though it's your right, secrecy is a key part of starting a union campaign. Number two, once you've got your initial group, whether it's just two people, you and someone else, or three or four, but a small group, you want to get in contact with Worker Justice Wisconsin to learn more about unionism and to talk through this process in greater detail. It's really our job to make sure that you and your coworkers feel like you have a good grasp on the process, right? That's extremely important because when the time comes, you're going to have to be able to answer these same questions to your coworkers. The organizer, whether it's at Worker Justice or the union, is not going to be able to, right? We can't come into the shop when it's organizing. You're going to have to be that source of education for many of your coworkers. Now, once the initial group has, a good handle on all of this, we want to start working on forming a workplace organizing committee. And the mission of this committee is to organize all of the coworkers. Organizing a union is hard. And so you want to have a clear structure. You want to have accountability, right? You want to have regular check ins You want to have a core group that you build up, to organize everyone else. And so at the beginning, when you come to worker justice with those two or three initial coworkers, we're going to help you think through who else should be on this team, right? Who else do we need their help to build that organization? Um, Now, once you have that committee, let's say it's a big shop, it's almost 200 employees. Let's say it's a committee of 15 people, right? You've kept things a secret. You've met several times. Everyone is well educated on their rights and on this process. You're going to want to form a plan to talk to everyone else, their needs, to educate them, and to build unity across shifts and departments. That is really the goal. And might be the hardest or one of the hardest parts of this whole process is developing and implementing a plan to educate folks, build unity, build solidarity, and get them all on the same page so that everyone understands the value of having and being a part of a union. Now, at some point in this process, it always depends, it can always change, you're going to want to choose a union home. Like I said, worker justice, we're a worker center. You can't unionize with us. Our job is to help you get the ball rolling. But there are different times when it makes sense to choose your union home. Maybe it's when you've just formed your committee, or maybe it's when you've got 30% of the workforce, right? Like every campaign is going to be different. But at some point along this part, you're going to want to choose your union home. You're going to want to talk to various unions and talk with your coworkers who are leading this process about what makes the most sense for you. Now, let's say you've chosen your union home. The next key step is signing what's called union authorization cards. These cards are very straightforward. They basically say, I blank want such and such union to represent me, and you sign and you date it. Now, you ideally want 70%, around 70% of your coworkers to sign these cards. Now, legally, you only need about 33% of them to sign these cards, but you're going to want to aim for 70% for strategic reasons, and I'm going to explain why in just a minute. Once you have the union authorization cards signed, your union is going to ask the company for voluntary recognition. This almost never happens because companies hate unions because they hate sharing power. So the other option, and the one companies almost always choose, is going to a union election supervised by the Department of Labor. It's perfectly normal. Happens all the time. Now, in a union election, all of the employees at that work site are going to be able to vote, yes or no. Do you want such and such union to represent you? And to win that election, for the union to legally come into the company and the company to be legally required to bargain with you and your union, that union needs to win at least 50% plus one of the votes. So if there's 100 employees, you need 51 votes saying yes. And that goes back to why it's so important to aim for 70% of the authorization cards. Because getting someone to sign a card is the final step in a process of many conversations, education, trust building, relationship building to forge that unity. Because when you get to the election, it's always going to happen. Some people that said they would vote yes will vote no. Management intimidated them or bought them off, all of which is illegal, but it happens all the time. So you don't want to go to that election to risk it, right? Like you want to have your voters well organized and say, no, we're going into that election knowing we're going to win. We have a crushing majority. That's the strategy. Now, if you win the union election, that's when you start bargaining a contract with the employer. You, your coworkers, will choose a committee from among yourselves with the assistance of union delegates and maybe union lawyers to meet with management regularly to hammer out a contract. And everything is on the table: wages, hours, benefits, working conditions, um, code of conduct, process for firing, everything is on the table. And once you and your employer have hashed out that document, it goes to a vote to all of the employees. So if the employees vote to accept that contract, if they like it, congrats. You are now officially in a union and you have a union contract. But if the employees don't like that contract, they can vote it down and send their bargaining committee back to negotiate with management. Also perfectly legitimate to keep bargaining and trying to get a better deal. In other words, like I said, the union brings democracy to the workplace. At no point can the union force employees to accept a contract, right? It is a democratic process. So, like I said, organizing a union at work is very hard. And the reason is because bosses don't want their employees to share power, right? Like people with power rarely want to share it. They want to hold on to the decision making process, right? Um, and that's what the union is about. It's about sharing power. It's about the people who are most affected by these decisions having a meaningful role in that process. That's democracy. And many employers want to be able to keep taking advantage of their employees. Low wages, no retirement plan, few, if any, paid vacation days, few, if any, paid sick days, right? Like they want to have that ability to impose low standards. And, bosses often try to halt the unionization drive with threats. Hey, if you keep doing that, we're going to have to close the plant. Or, unions, if you bring in a union, it's just going to make everything worse. All kinds of threats to scare workers off from joining a union. Sometimes they try to buy workers off. Hey, if you vote no, I'll give you this raise, or I'll give you all a bonus. Or they try to buy off key leaders by giving them a promotion, right? So at the end of the day, they're going to try to divide and conquer. They're going to try to pit employees against one another. They're going to say, oh, those problems y'all have been experiencing, it's not because of us. It's because of the drivers, or it's over folks at stocking, or it's the assembly line. Like they're going to try to put the blame somewhere else to divide and conquer, to get the employees angry at each other rather than at management, who really has all the decision-making power. Nevertheless, just like I said at the beginning, there's lots of unions in this country. And all of those unions were the result of workers coming together, deciding what was important to them, and fighting for it. So you can do it. It's very hard, but it is an incredibly rewarding process that can dramatically improve the lives of yours and your coworkers. So if you're thinking about organizing, if you're thinking about unionizing, come talk to us or get in contact with a local union, and we'll help you get that process started and can answer any questions. Thank you.